Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here for the first information session for the Alberta Ecotrust Retrofit Accelerator program. My name is Andrea Linsky. I'm the Director of Emissions Neutral Buildings at Alberta Ecotrust. And we've got some sort of presentation lined up for you today from myself. One of our coaches, Garrett Clark, will come talk to you. And then we've got Marnie from the City of Edmonton here to talk about the City of Edmonton programs and how we're all working together. So there we go. First, I'll tell you a little bit about Alberta Ecotrust Foundation. We are actually an environmental charity and a nonprofit that's been around for over 30 years in Alberta. Many people haven't known that we've been around doing work for that long. I think our origin story tells a lot about the work that we do now. We originally originated from a friendship between executives in big oil and gas and in the environmental charity field. So they came together saying we've got to start bringing together unlikely partners to have discussions about how we can work together to create a healthier environment for all Albertans. And so that's where we came from. And today we've changed quite a bit and grown quite a bit. We have 4 key areas that we do work in here all the way across Alberta. We work on our grant program. So we have a few different grant programs, primarily for charities or nonprofits that are starting up, or not-for-profit organizations to support work in urban decarbonizations through our LC3 network, the Low Carbon Cities Network. We're one of the 3 LC3 partners, or one of the 8 LC3 partners across Canada. So we have grant programs that come out through that. We have done tons of strategic engagement over the years with different partners. We actually have a large endowment from the federal government that allows us to continue to do our work. And that endowment, we actually also do an impact investing. So we're actually investing it back into the community here in Alberta to support decarbonization type projects. And then we have our programs and initiatives, which have been growing quite substantially over the last few years. And the Retrofit Accelerator program that's being run by Alberta Ecotrust is one of these initiatives. We also have NBIX, the Emissions Neutral Building Information Exchange, which shares knowledge about buildings and how to decarbonize them, both new and existing buildings. And then we also have other great flagship programs like our home upgrades program, supporting making housing more affordable through upgrades. Okay, so that's an introduction to the Alberta Ecotrust. I will say that Alberta Ecotrust operates all the way across Alberta. So we would like to recognize the traditional territories of many diverse Indigenous people on these lands. This includes Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and Treaty 8 nations, the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, the Cree, Dene, Nakota Sioux, and Saulteaux, as well as the Métis Nation of Alberta. So today we have a few different things. I'm going to see if I can move this bar over to this side. Might be a bit better. Sure, nobody online is seeing
the little tiny bar on the far left.
This one here?
Yeah.
Ooh, perfect. Okay. So today, what we will do is we're going to go through what a deep retrofit is. For those of you who might be new to the concept, we will dive into what the Alberta Ecotrust Retrofit Accelerator is providing. We'll talk about the program offerings and how to actually get into this. So our primary audience for this session is building owners, operators, those who are actually looking at doing retrofits in their buildings. So this will give you the Coles notes on how to get moving. We're going to talk with our colleagues at the City of Edmonton about the programs that we're partnering with them in, and then we'll have questions and answers about the program afterwards. So to set some context, in Alberta, buildings account for only 10% of the overall carbon emissions in Alberta, and that's relatively low when you compare it to some other provinces, but that's primarily because we have so much big industry in Alberta. So if you think of the amount of emissions associated with buildings versus a lot of the processing, oil and gas processing things that are happening in the province, that's why that number is low. But when you look in the actual cities, the urban cores, the emissions coming out of buildings is really large, right? So at least 40 to 60% of the emissions associated with coming from cities, Edmonton and Calgary in particular, are coming from the operations of buildings that we have. So that context really gives us a goal or focus for the program, the Alberta Ecotrust Deep Retrofit Program, on trying to reduce the emissions associated with the buildings that are already existing. Because if you think all of the buildings that we have today will very likely, or at least a very large number of them, will very likely still be around in 50 years. So how do we try to reduce the emissions associated with them? Our targets that we talk about in the program are aligned with Alberta's Emissions Reduction and Energy Development Plan, which talks about a carbon neutral economy by 2050. So what is a deep retrofit? Deep retrofits are really about talking about a whole building approach. So traditionally, energy retrofits, starting back in the 1980s from the oil embargoes, probably had something more to do with trying to reduce quick wins for reducing energy. So let's replace our existing lighting, for instance, with something that's more energy efficient like LEDs. Let's start maybe replacing the odd pump that we have that needs to be upgraded. What we're talking about now is whole building approach. So how do we take into consideration all the pieces of a building, your envelope, your insulation, your windows, your heating systems, your lighting, your control systems, all of the different pieces, and look at how you're going to actually move them into a more efficient system altogether. So what we're talking about in our program is taking a look at your overall building, understanding what's possible and how we're going to get there. You often start by making things way more efficient than they currently are. So that might be upgrading your lights, but there's a lot of other ways to make things efficient with bigger equipment like windows and insulation. Looking at waste heat recovery. So if you have a server room in your commercial building, quite often there's a huge amount of heat coming off of those that can be repurposed into heating your water or other pieces of your building. What about electrification? So after you've taken a look at all of those things, you would then say, okay, how are we going to switch our existing heating systems that might be gas-based to electricity? And then finally, looking at on-site generation. So that would be solar potentially, as well as options like geo exchange may also be viable. So there are multiple benefits for deep retrofits. And one of the things we like to talk a lot about at Alberta Ecotrust is co-benefits of doing work or multi-solving for bigger problems. When we're looking at a building and you're developing a deep retrofit plan, you will be starting by reducing your emissions and your energy use in that building, which should in turn reduce your operational building expenses, right? Less energy that you're paying for would be lower dollar value that you're sending out the door on your utility bills. It will improve your building's performance, comfort, air quality, depending on the measures we call them, or the actual activities or projects that you're doing in the retrofit. You might also be improving your building's resilience to future changing climates. So we're talking about putting in hail-proof roofing or dealing with flooding that might be happening in that area. We also are hoping to streamline maintenance and management. So with upgrades of a building as a system. Oh, back on. Everyone online still good? Let's just see. Got a thumbs up from them. Thumbs up. Good. Okay, good, perfect. Thank you. Often you can streamline your maintenance and your management once you've upgraded a lot of the systems and the controls in your buildings. So that's at a building level. When you talk about your overall organizations, lots of people have multiple buildings in a portfolio potentially. What they can do is they can do a few different things. Every asset owner will have a different way that they manage their assets. Some people have long-term holdings where they have buildings they want to keep around for a long time. Others might be buying them, retrofitting them, and turning them over in sort of their real estate world. The nice thing about doing retrofits is that they will extend your building's useful life, the asset value, and the marketability. So these are the types of things that allow you to sort of justify that initial capital costs in some of the projects and move forward. It will demonstrate your corporate commitment to sustainability and environmental stewardship, and that works both for shareholders, but also for tenants that are in that building. I know that there are some organizations that are choosing their tenancy based on what the building has to offer from a sustainability perspective. And then the other piece is kind of interesting is that in some other jurisdictions, in Vancouver and in the United States, we're starting to see some legislation that's coming into play where large building owners are required not only to report on their actual energy consumption year over year, they're also being required to reduce that energy consumption year over year. And there are fees and penalties associated with not complying with these legislations. We don't have those in Alberta right now, but there are things that are happening in other provinces. So getting ahead of that, or if you happen to have a large portfolio that's across provinces, it's something you might be looking at across the board. So our Alberta Ecotrust Retrofit Accelerator is actually one of 11 retrofit accelerators that are being launched across Canada right now. It is funded through the Natural Resources Canada Deep Retrofit Accelerator Initiative. And the idea behind the program is to get some movement on supporting deep retrofits in the industry. So these are not intended to be large amounts of grants going out for capital dollars to the retrofits. It's more about supporting the development of the ecosystem, the capacity, the knowledge on how to do this work. Our program is also partially funded by the RBC Foundation's Tech for Nature initiative. So we have 2 funders for our program that allow us to do the work that we're doing. Our program has 2 core activities. And so depending on who's in the room and what you're interested in, you'll probably find one or the other more interesting. I'm going to start with the market development. So we realized in Alberta, we have a relatively new market to deep energy retrofits. There hasn't been a lot of movement in industry doing this work. So we not only need to stimulate the people asking for these deep retrofits, but we also have to support building the knowledge out there of the people who can do these deep retrofits and understand how to plan for them. So we've partnered with a few different key entities. The Alberta Energy Efficiency Alliance is going to be helping us with a lot of the contractors and the Trade Ally Network to help make sure that those who are actually physically doing a lot of the work that we're going to be doing in these buildings know what deep retrofits are all about and how they can get there. We're working with SAIT on a bunch of training and events that are going to be happening across Alberta related to deep retrofit knowledge sharing. We're partnering with the Pembina Institute to do a lot of research and policy papers to help inform industry and government about what options there are for how we can continue to push forward this work long term. We are also partnering very closely with NBIX, who was one of the partners that helped bring this event to us today, which is the Emissions Neutral Building Information Exchange. So they're going to be sharing out a lot of the knowledge that our coaches are gathering from this work, so that the rest of industry in Alberta and frankly around the world can learn from the work that we're doing. And we also have some really key partners in our 2 core municipalities that we're working with, the City of Edmonton and City of Calgary, for their benchmarking programs, and for the Clean Energy Improvement Program we're going to talk a little bit about as well. We're also working with Alberta municipalities and the SEED program that they're running. So we've got lots of different partners that we're all sort of bringing together to see how much we can do in the 2.5 years we have of this grant right now, just to really stimulate the art of the economy and start moving things forward. So that's what we're doing externally. Internally, which I think most of you are here today to learn about, is our coaching support for deep energy retrofits. So we have a team of coaches that have been hired internally at Alberta Ecotrust. You get to hear from one of them today. There are a few online as well, another one in the room. So these coaches are guiding building owners through the whole process that they need to go through. Doing a deep retrofit on a building is not a straightforward process. I wish it was. Everyone would be doing it if it was. I've worked for 15 years in supporting building owners and trying to do retrofits, and it's always a problem-solving activity of trying to figure out what's stopping the project from moving forward today and figuring out how we get through it. So what we have is this team of coaches who are there to help building owners all the way through the process. They are the ones that are gathering information and knowledge about what's working and what's not working from all over Alberta. So they're really like this concentrated expertise, like as they're learning about all this work, about how to navigate that process. So our program offers free coaching services for owners through that process. We are supporting tailored business case and deep retrofit plans, providing some of the funding to do that. We don't do all that work. We outsource that to some fantastic engineering and consulting firms that are out there. And then we are supporting building owners in understanding how they're going to actually move through the projects and realize them, see how they get there. One of the things that we provide for building owners, partially funded, we actually have two different plans we supply funding for. I think Garrett's going to talk a little bit more about all those steps. But one of them is a high-level assessment of your portfolio. So if you happen to have 50 buildings, where do you start? You can't afford to do a deep retrofit on every single building today. So let's talk about how we get you there. And then a deep retrofit plan would be about the buildings that you know have great potential for deep retrofits. But you need to get an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit, right? You might need to get all of these bits and pieces. And it's not about just doing the audit. It's also about figuring out how do you do the technical stuff that we talked about in that retrofit pyramid there, but also how do you tie it in with your asset management strategy? So you might have capital renewal plans that are already moving forward. How do you plan with those in mind? You might have investment thresholds that your corporation's willing to hit. So you aren't allowed to take on more debt perhaps than a certain level, or else your funders or your owners might be upset or concerned. Access to project financing. That's a big part of what our coaches help you figure out is where can you get money to do deep retrofits? What rate can you borrow that money at? Are there any grants that are available for you to be able to get through that process? It is a very complex field. And actually one of our next webinars, I was going to plug it at the end, but is the first one we're doing with SAIT. Actually, it's an in-person session, but we're going to do it in Edmonton and Calgary. It's going to focus on all the financing opportunities that are out there and how you navigate that landscape of the financing opportunities that exist. We also, I think that's November 21st. So keep an eye out for that one. We also are helping set basis plan on internal and external targets. So do you have corporate goals for decarbonization? Does the federal government have goals that they've set for Canada that we should be trying to align to? These are the pieces that will help. And then also understanding that your tenants are often impacted by big retrofit projects. So how do we consider that when we're actually doing the retrofit work as well? I have just two more slides and I'm going to hand it over to Garrett here. I talked a little bit about all of these pieces, but our deep retrofit builds off of a core technical assessment, an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit that really provides detailed assessment of what we could potentially do in your building from a replacement perspective. We're looking at achieving pathways to renewal, pathways to 80% emissions reductions, ideally, in buildings, and to zero over time by 2050. So we're really trying to figure out how to get buildings to that pathway. Sometimes building owners will have a whole bunch of stuff going on where they're like, okay, we need to replace this leaky envelope, or our boilers are about to fail. Let's just do it all at once. One big capital project. We're going to take on, borrow from a financing opportunity and do that work all at once. Some building owners, and this is the group that we're really interested in talking more with, are going to say, well, I own this asset. I intend to own it for 20, 30 more years. We have a regular renewal where we're replacing equipment or replacing windows at this time as we go through. How can I actually change that plan so that we're doing it to get us to zero over time? And that's a big piece of what we're hoping to work with building owners on as well. And then considering other non-energy considerations, such as making sure that we've got climate resilient materials being used on projects or being retrofitted for. We'll be doing some sensitivity analysis. So what happens if there's no more carbon tax? What happens if utility rates go way up or way down for different utilities? So that when your board asks these questions, you have the ability to say, well, if we install this equipment, it'll mitigate these risks, or, you know, these are the impacts of that type of work. And then we'll actually have materials that we can take back to the decision makers within organizations to help determine the next steps. Our coaches help through all of that. They don't do that work. We contract a lot of that work out to consultants that we've pre-qualified, but they are there to help you ask the right questions as you go through that process. So yeah, as I've mentioned, we have officially launched our program as of September 24th this year. The program formally ends March 31st, 2027. We're hoping to find additional funding to continue it beyond then. But we want to get as many building owners in Alberta moving on this. If we can get deep retrofit plans out there, people, it'll be really fantastic. And we're also hoping to build the knowledge across Alberta of all the different players that might be part of a deep retrofit. So we're providing our coaching, we're providing some funding for these studies, and we're also helping you find qualified consultants to do the work as well. So I'll hand it over now, I think, to Evan, or to Garrett, sorry, to talk a little bit more about the program.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm just going to make sure my face is in here. Back here, that's good. So yeah, Andrea walked through most of the program there, specifically the deep retrofit plans, because that's a major part of the program. But how do you get to that part? How do you get to the point of having a deep retrofit plan? Well, you got to be eligible first. So we start with building eligibility. Right, every program has eligibility criteria. So this is an Alberta focused program. So initially, your building has to be located in Alberta. Like Andrew said, we operate across Alberta. Next, it has to be an existing building. So we're not looking at new builds here. We're looking at buildings that have been built and operating for at least 2 years. So when we do work with them, we have some existing data we can leverage to understand how the building is being used. And then finally, there are certain types of buildings that are eligible for the program. So first, multi-unit residential buildings. So these buildings are buildings with common entrance and 2 or more units. And there are a few other criteria. So 4 stories or greater, then that's okay. If it's less than 4 stories, it has to have a footprint of 600 meters square. So it has to be a fairly big building. So there are some size requirements. Commercial buildings, there are a lot here. So it could be anything from a grocery store, office building, hotels, restaurants, banks, you name it. We have a long list. So if you are interested, reach out and we can let you know if your building falls within that list. And then of course, institutional buildings. So municipal buildings, rec centers, admin centers, operations centers, universities, schools, K-12 schools, hospitals, healthcare centers, anything like that. So we try to capture a lot of the buildings in the program. Now, what's not included would be industrial buildings, so heavy industrial or light industrial, and that includes manufacturing facilities that assemble goods. And then, of course, single-family homes, detached homes, duplexes, fourplexes, row houses, townhouses, because none of those have a common entrance under the residential category. So the journey, Andrea mentioned before that nothing is really straightforward. So don't be fooled by this nice straight arrow. When you're actually in the program itself, we'll probably jump around a bit, and it's never quite this straightforward. But we have to put something on a slide. So here it is. We start, of course, with intake and screening. So making sure you're eligible, bringing you into the program, having some discussions. This is where the coach comes in, and we learn about your building. We learn about the environment within the building, and we learn about how you use the building and your goals associated with where you want to get. And then we take that and we go into benchmarking. So we figure out where is your building now? How is it being used now? How is it operating now? What's the energy use intensity? And that provides us just with a baseline to begin some discussions about deep retrofit planning and where we might go. Then we get into the desktop assessment. So this is a very light touch assessment. And the idea here is to go a little bit beyond benchmarking and look at what deep retrofit plans could look like when we really dig deep, right? So this breaks down your energy use a little bit more by end use. And we start to get an idea of where we might be headed. And really that fosters conversation and understanding of coaching the building. Now, number 3 here, identification of capital financing and funding options. So this is something we kind of start with step 1 and we take all the way through. So the whole time we're talking about, we're going to do these studies. And first of all, how are you going to finance your part of the study? But also, when we get to the point of implementing the retrofits, what does that look like for you? Is it a self-finance option? Do we need to look for external funding? Are you interested in financing? And we have those conversations, start to open some doors, really dig into what works for the participants in the program. Then we'll get into the energy assessments and deep retrofit planning. So typically this would start with at least an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit, and that informs the deep retrofit plan. So the deep retrofit plan builds on that, takes a little bit further. And then once all that's laid out, you get into design, implementation, and measurement verification, which is monitoring to make sure that what we built is actually operating as intended and you're getting expected outcomes. So for that, coach support 100% of the way through, and the participant wouldn't pay anything up until step 4, in which case we start to support 15. Now, just some base program requirements I want to touch on. We don't have a lot of them, but one is off the start, we ask every participant to sign a consent and acknowledgement agreement, which essentially says that whoever we're talking to is authorized to act on behalf of their organization, right? So we know we're talking to someone that can do that. And they agree to share their organization's data with Alberta Ecotrust, and then we can in turn share with service providers and consultants that would be doing the work with us. So it's really setting up the data sharing aspect. Now, the study funding agreement, that's when we get to the part where we're paying for some of the costs for the audits and the deep retrofit plans, participants paying for some of those costs. And then, of course, it's 3 parties there, so the consultant signs. And that's just to make sure we have a scope worked out and everyone knows where the money comes from, who's paying for what. The project charter, so this comes after the deep retrofit plan. So now you have an idea of where you might want to go. So what the coaches will do is they'll write up a project charter drawing on all the previous steps we've worked through. And at the end of it, we ask the participant to take a look at it and sign it. And really, it's a good faith effort that they're going to proceed with implementing these, whether it's, you know, the plan was to do it in the short term or over the long term, but it's essentially a sign of good faith that we've done all this work and now you're going to see it through. And then, of course, a deep retrofit plan. A question we do get is, can we just do an ASHRAE audit and stop there? And then we're going to say no. Part of the program is to come up with this deep retrofit plan, to build a business case, to take things a little bit further and come up with how you're going to deliver the implementation. So you have to complete that part. So how to get started? Really, you can scan this QR code for those of you online or here today, and that'll take you to our website. And potentially, well, if you do go to the website, there's a contact form and it'll say, get in touch with the coaches. And if you go there, you fill out some basic building information, and then that sends out an email to the coaches. And we will then reach out to you and start that process of checking the eligibility and discovering more about your building, just starting that conversation. So now just some frequently asked questions we typically get. And then I will be done my part here. But what support do you get from the coaches? So Andrew has touched on this a bit, but just to reiterate here. So the coaches are going to provide options and alternatives throughout the process. So we're not going to make decisions for the owner. It's the owner's responsibility to still make their decisions. We're not doing that. But what we're going to do is help gather the information and help synthesize it in a way that they can digest it so that they can make informed decisions. The coaches are also going to help identify third-party financing and grant options and talk to the owners about those. And if the owners want to pursue any, then we help navigate that process so they're not doing it alone. And finally, we have relationships with pre-qualified consultants. So we're hopefully saving the owners a little bit of time by having those consultants ready to go, and we don't have to spend as much time looking at price. So you get rolling a little bit sooner. Does the program pay for my deep retrofits? Well, a few slides back, if you picked up on it, the answer is no. We don't pay for the implementations. We're not going to pay the equipment costs, the installation costs, any of that. But what we do offer, again, is the free coaching, the benchmarking and assessments. That's all no cost. So those high touch assessments. And then we partially fund the energy studies and the deep retrofit plans, and we'll help with the funding applications to help cover those actual capital costs. So who's qualified to do the work outlined in the program? Well, again, these pre-qualified consultants we've established relationships with are going to be doing the work. We set them up, they understand the scope. We're constantly working with them to smooth out the wrinkles and make sure the delivery goes as smoothly as possible. Now, if you are working with a provider who wasn't pre-qualified, but someone you typically work with, and you'd like to continue that relationship, we can absolutely collaborate with them. We don't want our list to be a barrier to someone entering the program, so we're more than happy to collaborate with them. We just have to make sure that they continue to meet the program standards, so we'll work with them to make sure. Now, Alberta Ecotrust is very fortunate to have longstanding partnerships with the cities of Edmonton and Calgary. And today in the room, we have Marnie from the city of Edmonton. And Marnie is going to talk about the benchmarking program for the city of Edmonton. In the city of Edmonton, it's called the Building Energy Benchmarking Program. And in Calgary, they have the equivalent Benchmark YYC. Marnie's also going to talk about something called the Clean Energy Improvement Program. I'll invite Marnie up.
Thank you. I just press the buttons to advance here. There we go. All right. So the city of Edmonton and the Alberta Ecotrust do partner on a lot of different initiatives, including the Retrofit Accelerator. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the Clean Energy Improvement Program that the city is offering. It actually launches tomorrow, which is kind of exciting in our permanent program for both residential and commercial. But essentially what it is, CIP, that's what we call it, allows residential and commercial property owners to access low-cost financing to make the energy efficiency upgrades or renewable energy installations possible on their properties, which is a really good sort of combo with what the Retrofit Accelerator is offering with their coaching. The financing for this program is tied to the property, not to the owner. So if you move and you sell your property, the CIP tax stays with the property, doesn't go with the owner. And CIP does make it easier for property owners to do more and extensive and ambitious energy efficiency, like deep retrofits and renewable energy projects. So that's kind of what the program is going to offer. Why would you choose CIP? Some of the biggest reasons are really is competitive terms. There's long repayment periods up to about 25 years, depending on the use on the retrofit that you do, the useful life of that particular retrofit. They're long-term and they're fixed interest rates. So that's generally very favorable. And again, loan transferability. So the financing stays with the property, not the participant. And so there's a reduced risk of not achieving your return on investment. So all those things are really important. Benefits to the owners or tenants. CIP financing can finance upgrades that increase your property value. I think Andrew talked about that a little bit, and really reduces your operating expenses. So there's lots of reasons why you might want to do this. What's eligible? Any upgrade essentially that increases energy efficiency or generates renewable energy on site, that's what's eligible. Upgrades are recommended via an EnerGuide audit if it's residential, or an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit if it's commercial. In the city of Edmonton, we require a minimum of 3 upgrades to be installed for a single project, but there's really over 50 categories available, and more information can be found sort of on myCIP/commercial for details. Oh, we lost it. Oh, there it is. In fact, just a few examples of what's eligible. Things like windows, doors, insulation, heating, ventilation, and AC, ground and air source heat pumps, solar PV, lighting and controls, and commercial kitchen ventilation, and many others. So there's lots of different options. If you have an idea, we have a list, and we can let you know if it's eligible. Again, the financing terms, just to highlight them, up to 25 years, depending on what you're doing. Projects have to be a minimum of $3,000, which usually isn't an issue. There's maximum financing for residential of $50,000, but it's $1 million for non-residential and $300,000 for farmland. The annual clean energy improvement tax, it can't exceed your municipal property tax paid in the previous year. So you had a specific, whatever your property tax, you can't more than double it. And again, it launches tomorrow. So if you're looking for more information, you can ask questions here, or you can visit that website, mycip.ca, for more information. And just complementary to our CIP program, one of the programs that we also offer at the city at no charge is called Building Energy Benchmarking. And one of the requirements for participants in CIP is to actually benchmark their buildings. And in case you don't know what benchmarking is, it's just sort of the definition here, the process of comparing your building's energy and emissions performance to similar buildings and itself over time. So you're sort of looking at how you're using energy over time. And how do we do it? Well, high level, we use a tool called Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is a standard across North America, and it's free from Natural Resources Canada. And essentially, to do benchmarking, you just need your monthly energy use information, so electricity and natural gas, and at least 1 year of data. And then you just need basic building information, your square footage, your building type, your address, things like that. So you don't need a lot of information to do benchmarking, but it does give you a lot of useful information. A couple of key metrics that we get from benchmarking is energy use intensity. So that's essentially how much energy does your building use per square meter of space. And we also calculate greenhouse gas emissions and how many GHGs does your building emit per year. And then we compare that to other buildings to see if you're better or worse, and if you're getting better or worse over time. And by doing this type of benchmarking, we can find opportunities to save money on your energy bills. And this is kind of where it connects really well with the Retrofit Accelerator. Because with audits and things, you can sort of look for, okay, if I do this improvement, I can save this much energy. And you can sort of line things up and figure out what kind of financial impact retrofits will have. So that's really kind of the whole purpose of benchmarking.
I think Dee Dee's responded to a few of these. Oh yeah, so we've got a list of our pre-qualified service providers online. So if you do want to see who they are, Alberta Ecotrust .com, and then we've got our Retrofit Accelerator there, so you can find it pretty easily. We also have some FAQ questions at the bottom of our website. Our Retrofit Accelerator website is pretty solid in providing you with some clear steps on what you want to be moving forward with. Questions: if we already have an ASHRAE level 1 or we've done part of the work, can we still be part of the program? Absolutely. Our coaches are there to remove barriers and just keep things moving. So if you have a bunch of ASHRAEs that have been done, can we help with the next steps? Absolutely. We can start. That's part of the initial assessment that our coaches do with you, is to figure out what have you done already, what are your goals, how do you want to get there. So we can work with all of that information. Sometimes we might need to redo pieces of things if it's not up to date or if things have changed. But for the most part, we're happy to work with what you have. Question about whether or not the programs will be funding air tightness testing. I can talk on the Ecotrust side. We haven't actually had to look at that yet. We do, basically, we have, part of the program's design is to help remove barriers. So when we're looking at like the design work that needs to be done, in some cases, if the design work needs to be supported for a reason or another, we might consider it. Air tightness testing might be included in the ASHRAE study, depending on the depth at which we want to look at things. So I think it would be a case-by-case basis, but it could be included in potentially in some of the scope for the full building plan. On the back end, so after the retrofit's done, let's see if the building's holding up to what it should be. That piece we hadn't flushed out yet, but it's something we could definitely look at. The program and the funding we have right now is only for the next 2.5 years. So I'm really hoping we have a bunch of projects that we've made it to that point with, but at this point, we're sort of getting the front half of the program up and running.
Yeah, I could jump in. So for the city's program, so you can actually finance an ASHRAE level 2 audit. So if you want to do air tightness as part of, like they would probably do that as part of an ASHRAE, then that could be financed through the CF program.
So the answer from the city of Edmonton, if you didn't hear online, was that could be financed through the CF program potentially as part of the ASHRAE level 2. If you are a tenant, how can you get involved? So we are working with whole buildings for the program. But if you are a tenant who wants a little bit of support engaging your building owner, we can to an extent accommodate that. We probably don't have time to pound the pavement for every single person, but if you do have need someone to come and explain the program to a board or advisory group, that's something that we might be able to support. Yeah, do we intend to work with condo boards? Yes, we already are. That's Garrett's expertise. Yeah. So that's one of the groups that what we're finding, and part of what's making our coaches really valuable is that every building type has very different ways of making decisions, right? So the way you work with a condo board or a co-op, for instance, would be very different than an individual corporate entity. Any other questions? No? Yeah.
I already asked this earlier, but I'll do it for the crowd. Basically, if you're applying for both the SEED program and the deep retrofit program, how do you get common consultants on board instead of having to use two different firms?
Yeah. So our program, one of the things that we're happy to do is, as like Garrett mentioned, early on in the process, we'll talk about financing options. So if the SEED program is a good fit for you, that'll be one of the ones that we talk about it and the options there. The pre-qualified vendors that we have stated and that they have stated, there is some alignment, not fully aligned. We're going to continue to work on that with them to make sure we get more vendors that are aligned. But as Garrett mentioned, we are not exclusively working with our pre-qualified vendors. If you come to us saying, I've been working with James Engineering Firm for 20 years, I want to keep working with them for this project, our coaches are there to help remove that barrier and move people through that process. So we could absolutely work with some of the pre-approved vendors from the CEEP. And we're running into the same thing. We'll see the same thing from other financing opportunities, right? Certain financiers out there like to work with certain engineering firms or like to work with different consultants. So we're just getting really well versed on that, so we can figure out how to navigate that with different clients depending on their financing needs. Yeah.
Will, like, certain programs like the SEGA funding requires ASHRAE level 3 audits? Will you fund ASHRAE level 3 audits in those circumstances?
Potentially, yeah. That's one of the things that we were looking at. That we've always been really hesitant to just use that ASHRAE level 2 bare minimum, language. But the intent is to, because the financiers all want something different, it's figure out what the pathway is and then figure out how we support that through the whole.
So it's not meant to be overly prescriptive in that way?
No.
That's helpful.
Well, that's the whole intent of the program. Keep it flexible so we can remove the barriers. Do I have an outline of what an ASHRAE audit includes? Oh, that's a long one, Roland. I would highly recommend taking a look online. We do have a requirement of what we require in our deep retrofit plans, and we would usually share that with participants once they're in the program. So that we do have that clearly outlined. I'm sure that someone on this chat has the direct link to the ASHRAE requirement and standard guidelines. There you go. Didi already shared it. They're all in there in detail. Tell us a little bit about the qualifications coaches have. Yeah, so our coaches are quite diverse in their background and expertise. They are not all engineers. They're not all business people. It's sort of a mix of different things. And that's because we're able to work with external partners for all of the technical formal guidance. So we will work with engineering firms. We will work with the financing opportunity organizations that are out there. But all of the coaches that we have do understand aspects of the deep retrofit process. They've been part of it. They've done it for other, in some cases, it's other real estate companies or they've been on the owner side. Some of them have been teaching it. So we've got lots of people with different levels of experience with that. But they all work as a team in the background, which is fantastic because you get the brains of 5 for the power of 1, I guess, helping you out. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just for the design funding, is that all electrical, mechanical, and is there a cap?
Yeah, the design funding is not across the board for everyone. So we have it would cover whatever is needed as the barriers, but most of the time what we see is the design funding can be financed through financing options. So a lot of the players that come to the table will say, the financing players will say, we'll actually include all of that design work in the financeable value. And so it doesn't really make sense from a program funding perspective to pour all that money into the design stuff if that's not the barrier to getting the work done. So we do have some design dollars allocated for very specific projects where that financing model isn't possible, or like the true barrier is actually like they've got all the capital dollars sitting there. They just need to get that design work done to be able to implement it. So it's not across the board for all participants, just the ones that have clearly demonstrated that that is like the biggest barrier for them to be able to move forward. And again, design costs are expensive, right? We can spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on the full design work associated with some of this work, and our program doesn't have that kind of funding to put into it. So it's going to be sort of a case by case basis. Yeah.
Is it stackable with other funds?
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have any limitations. It's just whether or not they have limitations. So
They would be able to stack with the federal government?
as far as we know, we can stock with other federal funding. Yeah. Unless I've heard otherwise. Yep, we're good. So yeah, but this is all federal funding. So just keep that in mind. If that makes any difference in how things work for you, it's all coming from the federal government. Okay. I'm gonna close notes in. Yeah, come up, Marnie. That's way safer than me.
Sorry. So, the question was about financing and how long the financing goes for. And essentially, it's for the effective useful life of the upgrade. So if it was solar panels, you'd be able to finance it over 20 years. Some other things like HVACs, they might be 10 years. So it just depends on the upgrade that you're doing, how long you can finance it. The interest rates, for the pilot program, they were about 3% or a little bit under. The permanent program, the interest rates are going to go up a little bit, but we sort of calculate those as projects come in. So they will probably be a little bit higher, but still be really competitive.
Third, second person.
Part D would be, okay, so now I only get part of my funding from that. How would you guys coach me to find that extra funding? Let's say I didn't want to go deeper on my retrofit, so I don't have to go through construction again.
Yeah, so the question was, how could the coaches help access more financing potentially or funding for projects? That's exactly what we would do at the beginning, is we would look at all of the options for financing that are out there, which ones are palatable to your organization from a risk perspective, or the types of debt you might want to take on. And we would keep as many doors open as possible for as long as possible. So we get to the point where we've got a project. If you're allowed to finance things through SEEP and another financing partner, you could bring in 2 different project partners that would cover more of the funding for the project.
I'll just add, so I'll stand up here so people can hear. The city of Edmonton, they do have a maximum of $1 million, but if there was a need for more, then we can ask for that through the CEP program. We just have to, it's a special process, but it's still doable.
Sounds like it's time to help.
The one comment reminded me from Dee Dee here. One thing we cannot stack is deep retrofit accelerator funded programs on deep retrofit accelerator programs. So if you're going, there are some other deep retrofit accelerator programs that are operating in Alberta. And so if you're going to work with them and us, we need to talk between each other about who's paying for which studies and how we track that. Because we send a list back to Enercan of all of the Energy Star portfolio manager IDs of the buildings that we're working with. Just because they need to be tracking that. So if the same building showed up on 4 Dre grantees, they might start to scratch their heads and say, what's this building doing? Yeah. Thanks, Steve, for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Great. Anything else online? Okay, thanks everyone for your time.